Hello, I'm Dominic Walker, JMW's Inside Man. My guest is David Smith. David is a partner within JMW's commercial litigation department, specialised in property litigation at the London office. So, David, I believe that things are changing in terms of private landlords in Wales. What is changing?
Yeah, it always seems a bit odd. I'm sitting in a London office talking to you about Wales, but I had a lot of involvement in the Wales, and I acted as a specialist advisor to the committee in the Welsh Assembly that considered this legislation. So, and I went to university for a number of years in Wales, so I've always been interested. But basically, the Welsh Government is using its devolved powers over housing matters to throw away all the existing, or most of the existing, private rented sector legislation. So the Housing Act 88 and assured short-hold tenancies for private landlords, and the Housing Act 1985 and secure tenancies for social landlords, and replace all of that with a new piece of legislation called the Renting Homes Wales Act. And that's been around since 2016, and it's been delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and it is finally coming into effect on the 15th of July this year.
And how will this new legislation impact private landlords?
Well, it's a pretty radical change. I mean, the sort of idea behind it, to a large extent, it's based on a Law Commission report from quite some time ago. But the idea is to try not to have two parallel sectors, a private sector and a social sector. It's to try and start to sort of bring them together. There are differences between the different types of contract, but they're, as far as possible, trying to get rid of that. And the other thing that the Welsh Government's done, is trying to do, which is kind of a good thing, is to get rid of the mishmash of legislation. One of the reasons that I get paid, frankly, is that the private sector landlord legislation is a bit of a mess, and it's all over the place in lots of different bits of legislation. And there's a sort of an attempt here to try and bring together some of it. How successful that is, I'm not going to comment on. It's successful-ish. But as a side effect of that, what the way that this is being done is that literally overnight on the 15th of July, all existing tenancies and licenses under the old regimes will cease to exist and will be automatically converted to these new contracts. They're called occupation contracts. With a 6-month period for everyone and to get their ducks in a row and sort themselves out, which for larger landlords, both social and private, is a huge job, because they're going to have to go and interact with all of these tenants and license holders and licensees and give them occupation contracts. And even for small landlords, got a couple of properties, it's still a big task to get themselves all sorted and get their heads around a very different regulatory regime.
And there might be private landlords in Wales sort of scratching their head now, watching this, thinking, well, what do I do now? So how can you help, David?
Well, I think actually the bigger problem is that there'll be private landlords in Wales who'll be watching this in September, scratching their head months and months after it all comes into force. And so I think what everyone's very concerned about is there has always been a difficulty getting landlords to be aware of stuff in both, especially the PRS, and I think that's a bit of a concern as to whether that's actually going to work out. But obviously what we can do is I'm working for a couple of providers on providing new appropriate contracts for use in Wales, rather than using the government model contracts that the Welsh Government is supplying, which have specific weaknesses. We can provide advice to landlords on their obligations and responsibilities. And inevitably, I suspect, when people start to pursue cases under this legislation, will be one of the very few firms actually who have any expertise at all and aren't literally starting from a blank sheet of paper in actually being able to advise people and to pursue litigation on these issues. So we'll have to see how it all works out.
David, as ever, thank you very much for your insight. And if you'd like to speak to David, you can email insideman@jmw.co.uk or call 0161 82 81 999. I'm Dominic Walker, JMW's Inside Man.